The evening sky had just begun to darken as Anthony made the turn onto Maple Street. His sister's birthday dinner was starting in 20 minutes, and he had the cake safely buckled into the passenger seat of his car. The radio played quietly. In the background, some old-school R&B that reminded him of family gatherings when he was a kid. Anthony checked his watch. He was making good time. 15 years working for the Secret Service had made punctuality second nature to him. His job protecting government officials demanded precision in everything, from timing to observation to quick decision-making. But tonight, he was off duty. Tonight, he was just a man heading to his sister's house with a chocolate cake that had, "Happy 40th birthday, Liza," written in blue icing. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror caught him by surprise. Anthony glanced down at his speedometer. He was going exactly the speed limit. His turn signal had been used properly. His tags were current, and he knew for a fact that all his lights were working because he'd checked them just yesterday during his weekend car maintenance routine. With the practiced calm that came from years of high-pressure situations, Anthony eased his car to the curb, rolled down his window, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible. These weren't just professional protocols, they were survival tactics for a black man being pulled over, something his father had taught him long before he'd ever dreamed of joining the Secret Service. The officer approached slowly, one hand resting on his holster. He was white, probably in his mid-30s, with a crew cut and sunglasses despite the fading daylight. His nameplate read, "Officer Reynolds." "License and registration," Reynolds said without preamble, not bothering to explain why he'd pulled Anthony over. "Good evening, officer," Anthony said politely. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Reynolds' expression hardened. "Nice car you got here," he said, ignoring the question. "Seems a little too nice for this neighborhood. License and registration. Now." The implication wasn't subtle. Anthony felt a familiar tightness in his chest, that mixture of anger and resignation that came whenever someone decided he didn't belong somewhere based on the color of his skin. But years of training kept his voice steady as he replied, "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket and then get my registration from the glove compartment," he said clearly. "Just hurry up," Reynolds snapped. Anthony handed over his license and registration. As Reynolds examined them, Anthony decided to identify himself professionally. "Officer, I should mention that I'm a federal tax payment late, federal student loan overdue." Reynolds cut him off with a mocking laugh. "Don't care, buddy, not my department." "No, sir. I'm actually going to be quiet while I run your information," Reynolds interrupted again. "Sit tight." The officer returned to his patrol car. Through his side mirror, Anthony could see him talking on his radio, occasionally glancing toward Anthony's car with what looked like a smirk. Anthony pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his sister. "Running late. Got pulled over. Nothing to worry about." After what seemed like an unnecessarily long time, Reynolds returned, this time with a notepad. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why, officer?" "Because I told you to," Reynolds said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Step out now." Anthony complied, moving slowly and deliberately. Standing at his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of athletic build in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, he could see something harden in Reynolds' expression. "Turn around, hands on the car." "Officer, I don't understand what's happening here. I wasn't speeding. All my documentation is in order." "You've got a broken taillight," Reynolds said, "and your window tint looks darker than the legal limit." Anthony knew both claims were false. His taillight was perfectly fine. He'd checked his car thoroughly just yesterday, and his windows weren't tinted at all. "Sir, my taillight is working properly and my windows aren't tinted." "You calling me a liar?" Reynolds stepped closer, his hand again drifting to his holster. "No, sir," Anthony said evenly. "I'm just stating facts about my vehicle." "Well, here's another fact. I'm the one with the badge, which means I decide what out here." Reynolds began writing on his notepad. "I'm citing you for a broken taillight, excessive window tint, and now for obstruction for arguing with an officer." Anthony took a deep breath. "Officer Reynolds, I'd like to explain who I..." Save it for the judge. Reynolds cut him off again. I've heard every excuse in the book. As Reynolds continued writing the citation, a second patrol car pulled up. Another officer, younger with a nameplate reading Officer Chen, stepped out and approached. Everything okay here, Reynolds? Chen asked, glancing between them. Just finishing up with this one? Reynolds replied. Got mouthy when I pulled him over for equipment violations. Chen looked at Anthony's car, then back at Reynolds with a slightly puzzled expression, but said nothing. Reynolds tore the citation from his notepad and thrust it toward Anthony. Court date's on there if you want to waste your time fighting it. Or you can just pay the fine, $300. Anthony took the paper, his face carefully neutral despite the boiling frustration inside. Thank you, officer. Am I free to go now? Yeah, get out of here, Reynolds said, and get that taillight fixed before someone else pulls you over. As Anthony got back into his car, he heard Reynolds say to Chen, These guys always think they're special. Drive nice cars they probably can't afford, then act all indignant when they get pulled over. Anthony carefully pulled away from the curb, acutely aware of both officers watching him. Once he was a few blocks away, he pulled over again and closed, his eyes taking several deep breaths to steady himself. The cake box sat undisturbed on the passenger seat. The citation lay on the dashboard. His Secret Service credentials remained in his pocket, unacknowledged. He'd been trained to de-escalate situations, to remain calm under pressure, to make split-second life or death decisions. But none of that training fully prepared him for moments like these. Moments when he was seen not as a professional, not as a protector, not even as a citizen deserving of basic respect, but simply as a threat because of his skin color. Anthony checked his watch again. He was definitely late now. He picked up his phone to call his sister, but then paused, looking at the citation. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Usually, he'd make a call to someone in the police department. His credentials would be acknowledged, and the whole thing would disappear with mumbled apologies. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, as he stared at Officer Reynolds' scrawled signature on the bogus citation, Anthony made a decision. He wouldn't make that call. He wouldn't use his position to make this go away quietly. This time, he would see this through the way any regular citizen would have to. He would go to court. And there, with all proper procedures followed, Officer Reynolds would learn exactly who he had pulled over, and perhaps learn something about his own prejudices in the process. Anthony started his car again and pulled back onto the road. His sister was waiting, and there was a birthday to celebrate. The rest could wait for court day. Anthony arrived at his sister's house 30 minutes late. The cake box in his hands felt heavier than it should have, weighted down by the encounter that had delayed him. When Liza opened the door, her smile quickly turned to concern. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, taking the cake from him. I'm fine, he replied, forcing a smile. Just got held up by a traffic stop. Inside, the warmth of family gathering embraced him. His nieces ran to give him hugs. His brother-in-law waved from where he was setting up the grill in the backyard. For a moment, Anthony considered letting go of what had just happened, enjoying the party and dealing with the citation later, privately. But throughout the evening, even as he laughed and caught up with relatives, the interaction with Officer Reynolds kept replaying in his mind. Each time the anger bubbled a little closer to the surface. Uncle Anthony, why are you breaking your fork? His 10-year-old niece pointed at his hand, where he had unconsciously been bending the plastic fork until it had snapped. He blinked and set the broken utensil down. Sorry, kiddo. Just thinking about work stuff. Later, as the party wound down, Liza cornered him in the kitchen. Spill it, she said, arms crossed. What really happened earlier? Anthony sighed and pulled the crumpled citation from his pocket. As he recounted the details of the stop, his sister's expression hardened. You need to report him, she said firmly. This is exactly the kind of thing you always talk about, changing from within the system. I know. So what are you going to do? Anthony stared at the citation. I'm going to court. The next morning, Anthony walked into the Secret Service field. office earlier than usual. The night shift was still on duty, and a few agents looked up in surprise as he entered the break room. "Jackson, you're not on until 9, said Diane, a veteran agent who had trained Anthony when he first joined. "What brings you in at the crack of dawn?" He hesitated, then pulled out the citation. "Got pulled over last night. Thought I'd get some advice." Diane scanned the paper, her eyebrows rising. "Broken taillight? Window tint? That car of yours is maintained better than the presidential limo." Exactly. By the time his actual shift started, the story had spread through the office. His supervisor, Director Thompson, called him in around 10. "Heard you had some trouble last night," Thompson said, gesturing for Anthony to take a seat. A career agent with 30 years of service, Thompson was known for his no-nonsense approach and unwavering integrity. Anthony nodded and explained the situation in detail. "Did you identify yourself as Secret Service?" Thompson asked when he'd finished. "I tried. He cut me off every time." Thompson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You know I could make a call. This would disappear by lunchtime." "I know, sir. But you don't want that." Anthony met his supervisor's gaze. "No, sir, I don't." A small smile crossed Thompson's face. "Good man. Tell me what you need." "The dash cam footage from my car. And maybe access to traffic camera footage from that intersection to verify my taillight was working." Thompson nodded. "Consider it done. Anything else?" "Just your support when this gets messy. Jackson, you've been on my detail for 7 years. You've taken bullets meant for people who make the laws in this country. The least I can do is back you up when you stand up for what's right." Thompson leaned forward. "But I have to ask, are you sure about this? Going through official channels instead of handling it quietly means this becomes public record." Anthony thought about it. Going to court meant potential media attention. It meant putting his word against a police officer's in a system that didn't always favor people who looked like him, regardless of their credentials. It meant opening himself up to scrutiny and possibly retaliation. "I'm sure," he said finally. "If I use my position to make this go away behind the scenes, nothing changes. Reynolds pulls over the next black guy in a nice car and the cycle continues." Thompson nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this by the book. No shortcuts, no special treatment beyond what any citizen would be entitled to for gathering evidence in their defense." "Understood." As Anthony left the office, his colleague Rob caught up with him in the hallway. "Hey, I heard what happened. That's messed up, man." "Yeah. My cousin works dispatch for the county. Want me to see if he can pull some strings?" Anthony shook his head. "Thanks, but no, I'm doing this the right way." Rob looked surprised. "You sure? Could save you a lot of headache." "I'm sure." Later that day, Anthony reviewed the dashcam footage from his car. The agency-issued vehicle had a security system that included both forward and rear-facing cameras, a precaution for agents who might be followed or targeted. The footage clearly showed his functioning taillight as Officer Reynolds pulled him over. It also captured the audio of their interaction, every dismissive comment, every interruption when Anthony tried to identify himself, and the conversation between Reynolds and Chen afterward. Anthony burned a copy to a secure drive, then headed to the courthouse to file his not guilty plea and request a hearing date. The clerk at the counter looked bored as she took his information. "Contest form says you're pleading not guilty to 3 violations: broken taillight, illegal window tint, and obstruction. Court date will be 3 weeks from today." She handed him a slip with the date and time. "Judge Wilson's courtroom, 9 a.m. "Thank you," Anthony said, tucking the paper into his pocket. As he turned to leave, he noticed a bulletin board with police department commendations. Officer Reynolds' face stared back from one of the photos, receiving an award for community service alongside several other officers. That night, Anthony sat at his kitchen table, the evidence spread before him: the citation, the dashcam footage, his car maintenance records. There was also a file Thompson had provided showing Reynolds' history of traffic stops. The officer had a pattern of pulling over minority drivers at a rate significantly higher than his colleagues. His phone buzzed with a text from Liza. "Did you go through with it?" He typed back, "Court date is set." A moment later. Proud of you, bro. Anthony stared at the court date notice. Part of him still questioned whether this was worth the trouble. He'd built a career on being the kind of person who handled problems efficiently and discreetly. Going to court meant doing the opposite, making noise, drawing attention. But then he thought about his nieces and nephews growing up in a world where the color of their skin might still determine how they were treated by those sworn to protect and serve. He thought about all the people who'd been in his position but didn't have a Secret Service badge to fall back on. His decision was made. He would see this through, not just for himself, but for every person who'd ever been wrongfully targeted and lacked the means or position to fight back. Anthony carefully organized the evidence into a folder, already planning how he would present his case. Officer Reynolds had no idea what was coming, or who he had really pulled over that evening. The courthouse stood tall and imposing against the morning sky, its stone steps already crowded with people hurrying to various hearings and appointments. Anthony checked his watch, 8:30 a.m., giving him plenty of time before his 9 a.m. hearing. He straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase from the passenger seat of his car. He'd chosen to wear a charcoal gray suit today, professional but deliberately without the telltale earpiece or lapel pin that would identify him as Secret A. Service? The only indication of his profession was tucked securely in his inside pocket, his credentials and badge, which he had no intention of revealing until exactly the right moment. As Anthony climbed the courthouse steps, his phone buzzed. A text from Thompson. "Good luck today. Department's behind you." The message steadied him. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd second-guessed his decision more than once. It would have been so easy to make a call, have the citation thrown out, and move on with his life. But every time that thought crossed his mind, he remembered Officer Reynolds' smirk and the dismissive way he'd cut Anthony off when he tried to identify himself. The courthouse interior was bustling with activity. Anthony checked the docket posted on the wall. His case was 5th on the list for Judge Wilson's courtroom. He found a seat on a wooden bench in the hallway and opened his briefcase, reviewing his evidence one last time. The dashcam footage was loaded on a tablet, ready to play. His car maintenance record showed a full inspection just 2 days before the stop, with all lights working properly. He also had printed stills from the traffic camera at the intersection, clearly showing his functioning taillights. Nervous? Anthony looked up to see an older man with kind eyes sitting next to him. "A little," Anthony admitted. "First time in traffic court?" "Yeah," the man nodded. "Just tell the truth and you'll be fine. I come here twice a year when they do their ticket quotas. These officers rarely expect anyone to actually show up and contest the citation." Before Anthony could respond, the courtroom doors opened and people began filing in. He gathered his materials and found a seat in the gallery, 3 rows from the front. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, more functional than impressive, with fluorescent lighting and worn wooden benches. The judge's bench stood at the front, flanked by the witness stand and court clerk station. The air smelled faintly of coffee and furniture polish. At exactly 9:01 a.m., a side door opened and Judge Wilson entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. "All rise," the bailiff called, and everyone stood as the judge took her seat. "Be seated," she said, adjusting her glasses and looking out at the crowded courtroom. "We have a full docket today, so let's proceed efficiently. First case, Anthony." Watched carefully as the first 4 cases were called. 2 defendants pleaded guilty and paid their fines. 1 had his case dismissed when the officer failed to appear. The 4th managed to get his fine reduced after showing proof he'd fixed the violation. Then it was his turn. Case number 47892, County v. Jackson Anthony. Charges: equipment violation, Section 24.35a, window tint violation, Section 23.16b, and obstruction, Section 31.4. Officer Reynolds, prosecutor present. A man in a suit at the prosecutor's table stood up. "Present, Your Honor. Officer Reynolds is also present." Officer Reynolds walked to the front from where he'd been sitting, with several other officers in the gallery. He was in full uniform, his posture rigid and official. For a brief moment, his eyes met Anthony's, but there was no sign of recognition, just the same dismissive glance he'd given during their encounter. "Defendant present?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Anthony said, standing. "How do you plead?" "Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Very well. Prosecution, present your case." The prosecutor nodded to Officer Reynolds, who took the stand and was sworn in. He then began recounting the traffic stop with practiced ease. At approximately 7:15 p.m. on the evening in question, I observed a black sedan traveling on Maple Street with a non-functioning taillight. I initiated a traffic stop based on this equipment violation. Upon approaching the vehicle, I also noticed the windows appeared to be tinted darker than the legal limit. Anthony listened as Reynolds described him as immediately confrontational and refusing to comply with simple instructions. With each embellishment, Anthony's resolve strengthened. He knew what was coming next. When I informed the defendant of the violations, Reynolds continued, he became argumentative, insisting there was nothing wrong with his vehicle and attempting to intimidate me by claiming he was some kind of government agent. At this, several officers seated in the back of the courtroom chuckled quietly. Reynolds himself allowed a small smirk to cross his face. Despite his uncooperative attitude, I issued the citation professionally and advised him of his court date. The prosecutor nodded. "No further questions for Officer Reynolds at this time." Judge Wilson turned to Anthony. "Mr. Jackson, do you wish to cross-examine the officer?" "Yes, Your Honor." Anthony approached the front of the courtroom, stopping at the designated position for defendants. "Officer Reynolds, you testified that my taillight was non-functioning. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And you're certain of this?" "Absolutely. It's why I pulled you over." Anthony nodded. "You also stated that my windows appeared to be tinted darker than the legal limit. Could you explain how you determined this?" Reynolds shifted slightly. "It's a visual assessment based on my training and experience. Your windows were clearly darker than legally permitted." "I see. And regarding the obstruction charge, how exactly did I obstruct you in performing your duties?" "You were argumentative throughout our interaction, questioning my judgment about the violations and making claims about being some kind of important government employee to try to get out of the ticket. Did I raise my voice at any point during our interaction?" Reynolds hesitated. "Not exactly, but your tone was disrespectful." "Did I refuse any direct order you gave me?" Another pause. "No, but thank you, officer. No further questions at this time." Anthony returned to his seat as the judge asked if the prosecution had any other witnesses. They did not. "Mr. Jackson, you may present your defense," Judge Wilson said. Anthony approached the front again, this time with his tablet and folder of evidence. "Your Honor, I'd like to present several pieces of evidence that directly contradict Officer Reynolds' testimony." The judge nodded and Anthony began methodically laying out his case. "First, regarding the alleged broken taillight," he said, pulling out the maintenance records. "I had my vehicle fully inspected just 2 days before this incident. All lights were confirmed to be in working order." He handed the records to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. "Second, I have footage from my vehicle's dashboard camera system, which includes rear-facing cameras that clearly show my taillights were functioning properly at the time of the stop." Anthony set up his tablet to play the video. The footage clearly showed the functioning taillights as Reynolds' patrol car approached. The audio captured their entire interaction, including Reynolds cutting Anthony off repeatedly when he tried to identify himself. As the video played, Anthony noticed Officer Reynolds shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Several of the officers who had been chuckling earlier were now watching intently, their expressions serious. Additionally, Anthony continued after the video finished, "I have stills from the traffic camera at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street, taken moments before Officer Reynolds initiated the stop. They clearly show both taillights functioning." He handed these to the clerk as well. "As for the window tint violation, as you can see from both the video and these photographs, my windows are not tinted at all. They are the standard factory windows that came with the vehicle." Judge Wilson examined all the evidence carefully, then looked up at Anthony. "Mr. Jackson, this is quite thorough. Do you have anything to add regarding the obstruction charge?" "Yes, Your Honor. As the audio recording demonstrates, at no point did I refuse to comply with Officer Reynolds's instructions. I provided my license and registration promptly. I attempted several times to properly identify myself but was repeatedly interrupted. The judge nodded thoughtfully. And what exactly were you trying to tell Officer Reynolds about your identity? This was the moment Anthony had been waiting for. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his credentials. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to properly identify myself now. Judge Wilson nodded. Anthony opened the leather wallet to reveal his badge and ID card. I am Supervisory Special Agent Anthony Jackson of the United States Secret Service, currently assigned to the Presidential Protective Division. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly as she examined the credentials Anthony handed to her. Officer Reynolds' face drained of color, his earlier smirk completely gone. The other officers in the back of the courtroom sat up straighter, exchanging glances with each other. Agent Jackson, the judge said, returning his credentials, may I ask why you didn't simply use your position to address this citation through official channels? It's not uncommon for professional courtesy to be extended between law enforcement agencies. Anthony nodded. I considered that option, Your Honor. But I chose to appear in court as any citizen would because I believe the system should work properly for everyone, not just for those with badges or connections. If these citations were baseless for me, they would be equally baseless for any other driver. Judge Wilson studied him for a long moment, then turned to Officer Reynolds. Officer, do you wish to respond to the evidence presented? Reynolds cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Your Honor, I believed the taillight was out when I initiated the stop. It may have been an intermittent issue. And regarding the window tint, it was getting dark, which could have affected my perception. And the obstruction charge? The judge pressed. I may have misinterpreted the defendant's, Agent Jackson's tone during our interaction. Judge. Wilson looked between them, then down at the evidence before her. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Based on the evidence presented, she finally said, I find the defendant not guilty on all charges. Case dismissed. She rapped her gavel once, but then added, Officer Reynolds and Agent Jackson, please remain after we complete the docket. I'd like to speak with both of you in chambers. As the bailiff called the next case, Anthony returned to his seat, feeling dozens of eyes on him. Officer Reynolds sat rigidly in his chair, staring straight ahead, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The message was clear. This wasn't over yet. The real reckoning was still to come. The remaining cases on Judge Wilson's docket moved quickly, but Anthony barely noticed. His focus was split between the folder of evidence in his hands and Officer Reynolds, who sat stiffly at the front of the courtroom, occasionally glancing back with an expression that had shifted from arrogance to something closer to dread. When the final case concluded, Judge Wilson stood. Court is adjourned. Officer Reynolds and Mr. Jackson, please follow the bailiff to my chambers. As Anthony gathered his things, he noticed several people watching him with newfound interest. The older man who had spoken to him before the proceedings gave him a thumbs up. A young law student who had been taking notes leaned over. That was incredible, she whispered. I've never seen anyone come that prepared to traffic court. Anthony nodded politely but said nothing. This wasn't about the win. It was about what came next. The bailiff, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, led Anthony and Officer Reynolds through a side door and down a narrow hallway. Neither man spoke as they followed her to a wooden door marked Judge Wilson. Enter, came the judge's voice when the bailiff knocked. Judge Wilson's chambers were modest but dignified, walls lined with law books, a few framed diplomas and a large desk stacked with case files. She gestured to two chairs across from her. Please sit. As they sat, Anthony noticed the chief of police had also been called in. He stood near the window, his expression grim. Chief Bryant, thank you for joining us on such short notice, Judge Wilson said. I felt your presence was warranted given what transpired in my courtroom today. The chief nodded curtly. Of course, Your Honor. Judge Wilson folded her hands on the desk. Officer Reynolds, I've been on the bench for 22 years. In that time, I've developed a fairly good sense for when an officer is being truthful and when they're not. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. What happened today was troubling on multiple levels. Reynolds shifted in his seat. Your Honor, I genuinely believed— I'm not finished. The judge cut him off. Agent Jackson presented clear evidence contradicting every aspect of your testimony. Evidence that suggests this was not simply a matter of perception or error, but potentially a case of targeted harassment. She turned to Anthony. Agent Jackson, I must commend your professionalism today. Most people in your position would have used their credentials to make this go away, long before it reached my courtroom. Why didn't you? Anthony straightened in his chair. Your Honor, I've spent my career protecting a system I believe in, a system that should work equally for everyone regardless of their position or power. He glanced briefly at Reynolds. When I was pulled over without cause, I could have flashed my badge and likely driven away without a citation, but that would have solved only my problem. And you wanted to solve a bigger problem. Judge Wilson finished for him. Yes, Your Honor. Chief Bryant stepped forward. If I may, Judge Wilson, our department takes allegations of misconduct very seriously. I'd like to assure both you and Agent Jackson that this matter will be thoroughly investigated. I would expect nothing less, the judge replied, then turned back to Reynolds. Officer, do you have anything to say in your defense? Reynolds' face had gone from pale to flushed. Your Honor, I made a judgment call based on what I observed that night. If I was mistaken about the taillight or window tint, I apologize. But I followed protocol. Protocol? Anthony couldn't help himself. Is it protocol to approach a vehicle with your weapon drawn for a routine traffic stop? Is it protocol to ignore someone trying to identify themselves as a federal agent? Is it protocol to mock them to another officer afterward? Reynolds' jaw tightened. You have no idea what it's like out there. The split-second decisions we have to make— That's enough, Chief Bryant interjected. Officer Reynolds, you're not helping your case. Judge Wilson studied Reynolds for a long moment. Officer, I'm referring this matter to the department's Internal Affairs Division for further investigation. Until that investigation is complete, I'm recommending you be placed on administrative duty. Reynolds looked like he'd been slapped. But, Judge, this isn't a negotiation, Chief Bryant said firmly. Consider yourself on desk duty effective immediately. Judge Wilson turned to Anthony. Agent Jackson, do you wish to file a formal complaint against Officer Reynolds? Anthony had thought about this moment for weeks. In his mind, he'd imagined the satisfaction of watching Reynolds face consequences. But sitting here now, seeing the officer's career potentially derailed, he felt no joy. Yes, Your Honor, I do. But my complaint isn't just against Officer Reynolds. It's about a pattern of behavior that goes beyond one officer or one traffic stop. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. With your permission, I'd like to submit this data to both the court and the police department. It's an analysis of traffic stops in this county over the past 3 years, broken down by demographics. Chief Bryant's expression darkened as Anthony handed him a copy. Where did you get this information? It's public record, Chief. My colleagues at the Secret Service simply helped compile it. Anthony turned back to the judge. The data shows that minority drivers in this county are 3 times more likely to be pulled over than white drivers, and 5 times more likely to have their vehicles searched, despite lower rates of contraband being found. The room fell silent as both the judge and police chief reviewed the data. Reynolds stared at the floor, his earlier defiance evaporating. This is concerning, Judge Wilson finally said. Chief Bryant, I trust you'll incorporate this information into your investigation? Of course, Your Honor, the chief replied, though his tone had cooled considerably. We take these allegations very seriously. Good. Judge Wilson closed the folder. Because I'll be following this case personally. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Officer Reynolds, you're dismissed. Please check in with Internal Affairs before you leave the building today. Reynolds stood stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. As he reached the door, Judge Wilson added, And officer, I suggest you use this time to reflect on what it truly means to protect and serve. Once Reynolds had left, Judge Wilson turned to Anthony. "Agent Jackson, may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Chief Bryant took the hint and excused himself, promising to keep Anthony updated on the investigation. When they were alone, Judge Wilson's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Off the record, Agent Jackson, that was a brave thing you did today. Thank you, Your Honor. Not many people would have gone to these lengths, especially someone in your position." She studied him curiously. "May I ask why this was so important to you?" Anthony considered the question carefully. "My father was a bus driver for 30 years. He taught me that a uniform, whether it's a bus driver's, a police officer's, or a Secret Service agent's, comes with responsibility. It's not just about the power it gives you. It's about how you use that power." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I put on my badge every morning, I'm representing something bigger than myself. I believe Officer Reynolds forgot that somewhere along the way." Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Well, thanks to you, he's been reminded." She extended her hand. "It was an honor to have you in my courtroom today, Agent Jackson." "The honor was mine, Your Honor." As Anthony left the courthouse, the bright afternoon sunlight seemed to mirror his mood. For the first time since the traffic stop, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He checked his phone to find several messages from his colleagues and sister, all asking how it went. Before he could reply, his phone rang. It was Thompson. "How'd it go?" his supervisor asked without preamble. "Judge dismissed all charges. Reynolds is on desk duty pending an investigation." "Not surprised. With the evidence you had, it was open and shut." Thompson paused. "You know this isn't over, right? These things have a way of getting swept under the rug once the initial outrage dies down." "I know," Anthony replied, walking down the courthouse steps. "That's why I submitted the traffic stop data. Makes it harder to ignore the bigger picture." "Smart move. Listen, the director wants to see you when you get back. Word of what happened has made it up the chain." Anthony froze mid-step. "Am I in trouble?" Thompson chuckled. "Just the opposite. Let's just say there are some people very impressed with how you handled this. But that's a conversation for when you get back to the office." As Anthony ended the call and continued to his car, he noticed a small crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps. Among them was a local news reporter he recognized from TV, setting up for a live shot. For a moment he considered slipping away unnoticed. This had never been about publicity for him. But then he remembered all the people who'd been in similar situations without the badge, the evidence, or the platform to fight back. Maybe his story could make a difference for them too. Taking a deep breath, Anthony walked toward the reporter, ready to share what had happened, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved equal treatment under the law. Behind him, Officer Reynolds exited through a side door of the courthouse, his face tight with anger and humiliation as he watched Anthony approach the news crew. In that moment, the gulf between them seemed both vast and surprisingly small. Two men in uniforms, both confronting the consequences of their actions in very different ways. 6 months passed since that day in the courthouse. The leaves that had been green during Anthony's traffic stop had turned gold, fallen, and now were budding again on the trees lining the streets of his neighborhood. Spring brought a sense of renewal that seemed fitting given everything that had changed. Anthony pulled into the parking lot of the police academy, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. He straightened his tie, not the Secret Service uniform today, but a simple navy suit. The folder on the passenger seat contained his presentation notes for the training session he'd been invited to lead. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Knock 'em dead today, bro. So proud of you." Anthony smiled and sent back a quick thanks before gathering his materials and heading inside. The academy building was modern and bright, with motivational quotes about service and integrity lining the hallway. At the reception desk, a young officer looked up. "Agent Jackson, they're ready for you in the main lecture hall." "Thanks," Anthony replied. "And it's just Mr. Jackson today. I'm here as a citizen, not an agent." The officer nodded, though he still looked impressed. Anthony's case had made headlines beyond just the local news. What had started as a simple traffic court appearance had snowballed into something much bigger than he'd expected. The lecture hall was packed, not just with cadets but with veteran officers, community leaders, and even a few familiar faces from the courthouse. Chief Bryant nodded to Anthony from the side of the stage, where he was chatting with Judge Wilson. Their relationship had evolved considerably over the past months, moving from initial tension to grudging respect, and finally to a productive partnership. As Anthony set up his presentation, he reflected on everything that had happened since the day he revealed his badge in court. The internal investigation into Officer Reynolds had uncovered a pattern of similar incidents: minority drivers pulled over without cause, citations issued for non-existent violations, and a troubling record of complaints that had previously been dismissed. Reynolds had ultimately resigned rather than face disciplinary action, a decision that had sparked mixed reactions among his colleagues. More significantly, the data Anthony had presented that day had triggered a broader departmental review. Chief Bryant, initially defensive, had eventually embraced the opportunity for reform. New policies were implemented: body cameras for all officers, enhanced training on bias recognition, and a citizen review board with actual authority to recommend disciplinary measures. "We're ready when you are, Mr. Jackson," the academy instructor said, interrupting Anthony's thoughts. Anthony nodded and took his place at the podium. The room quieted as he looked out at the sea of faces, some eager, some skeptical, all attentive. "Thank you for having me today," he began. "My name is Anthony Jackson. 6 months ago, I was pulled over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken and window tint I didn't have. Today, I'm here to talk about what happened next and why it matters to everyone in this room." For the next hour, Anthony shared his story, not just the facts of the case but the human experience behind it, the frustration of being judged based on appearance rather than actions, the split-second decision to stand up rather than stand down, the ripple effects that one moment of accountability had created. "I could have flashed my badge that night and driven away," he told them. "That would have been easier, but it wouldn't have changed anything for the next person who looks like me, driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood." From the back of the room, a hand rose, a young cadet barely out of her teens. "But not everyone has a Secret Service badge," she pointed out. "Most people don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back like you did. How does your story help them?" It was a good question, one Anthony had asked himself many times. "You're absolutely right," he acknowledged. "Which is exactly why those of us with badges, whether Secret Service or police, have an extra responsibility. We're not just enforcing the law, we're guardians of public trust." He gestured to the changes happening around them. The body cameras now worn by every officer in this department protect both the public and the police. The new citizen complaint process ensures voices are heard. The community outreach programs build relationships before crises occur. Anthony clicked to his final slide, a simple image of his badge next to a police badge. "Different uniforms, same oath," he said quietly. "To protect and serve all people equally." As the presentation concluded, Chief Bryant took the stage to announce the department's newest initiative, a joint training program between local police and federal agents, designed to share best practices and build mutual respect. Anthony had helped develop the curriculum, drawing on his years of experience in protection details. Later, as Anthony packed up his materials, a figure approached. Officer Chen, the younger officer who had arrived as backup during the original. "Traffic stop, Mr. Jackson," Chen said, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Anthony asked, shaking his hand. "For not painting us all with the same brush." Chen looked uncomfortable but pressed on. "I knew something wasn't right that night. The taillight was working. I saw it. But I didn't say anything." Anthony studied the young officer. "And now?" "Now, I would," Chen said firmly. "The new policies make it easier to speak up, but honestly, it was your example that made the difference. Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, that's what we're supposed to do." Anthony nodded, appreciating the officer's honesty. "That's all any of us can do. Try to leave things better than we found them." As Anthony left the academy, he found Judge Wilson waiting in the parking lot. "Impressive presentation," she said. "The cadets were still discussing it when I walked past their classroom." "Thanks for coming," Anthony replied. "It means a lot to have your support." The judge smiled. "Well, your case certainly made my courtroom more interesting that day. But more importantly, it's made our community safer." She handed him an envelope. "The mayor asked me to give you this." Anthony opened it to find an official invitation to join the newly formed Police Practices Review Board as a civilian advisor. "They need people who understand both sides," Judge Wilson explained. "People who can bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community." Anthony considered the invitation. 6 months ago, he'd just wanted to prove a point about one traffic stop. Now he was being asked to help shape the future of policing in his community. "I'll think about it," he said, though they both knew he would accept. That evening, Anthony hosted a small gathering at his home, his sister and her family, Director Thompson and a few colleagues from the Secret Service, and surprisingly, Chief Bryant. They celebrated not just the changes in the police department, but Anthony's own news, a promotion to lead instructor at the Secret Service Training Academy, specializing in community relations and ethical decision-making. As Anthony looked around at the unlikely group gathered in his living room, federal agents and local police sharing stories and finding common ground, he thought about how far things had come from that tense traffic stop. His niece tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Anthony, is it true your story's going to be in a training video? My teacher said all the police are going to watch it." Anthony smiled. "Something like that. They're using what happened as a case study." "So you're famous now?" she asked, eyes wide. "No, not famous," he corrected her gently. "Just someone who did what needed to be done." Later, after the guests had left, Anthony stood on his porch looking up at the stars. His phone buzzed with a notification, an email from a civil rights organization asking him to speak at their upcoming conference. Another opportunity to share his story, to help build bridges. It wasn't what he'd expected when he decided to fight that citation. He'd simply wanted justice for himself. But somehow that personal stand had grown into something much larger, a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one man or one traffic stop. Tomorrow, he would return to his regular duties at the Secret Service. He would put on his earpiece and stand guard, vigilant and observant, ready to protect those under his care. But he would do so knowing that his most important service hadn't been rendered while wearing his badge, but when he'd stood up as a citizen and insisted on being treated with the same respect he showed others. As Anthony headed back inside, a police cruiser drove slowly down his street, routine neighborhood patrol. The officer inside nodded respectfully as they passed each other. No lights, no sirens, no suspicion. Just two professionals, acknowledging each other with mutual respect. Wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done, prejudices to overcome, trust to rebuild. But it was progress. Real, measurable progress. And sometimes, Anthony reflected as he closed his door, that's how change happens. Not in grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but in individual moments of courage. When one person stands firm and says, "This is not right, and I will not be silent." One traffic stop, one courtroom, one badge revealed at just the right moment, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.